Good afternoon. Welcome to this place of simple beauty and serenity as we come together to remember and celebrate the life and legacy of Don Cleary. I'm Abhijan Amanchi, one of the ministers serving this religious community, and on behalf of the Cleary family and Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church, I welcome you to this service. Thank you for joining us, especially those who are joining us online. We welcome you, and if you are able, please share in the chat where you're joining us from. We're gathered here this afternoon because the curtain of death has fallen between us and one we love, Don Cleary. It is always difficult to say goodbye to a beloved husband, father, grandfather, son, brother, uncle, a longtime friend and beloved member of our religious community. But this service also involves a special poignancy in our goodbye, because Don was also a very involved member here at Cedar Lane. He and Betty May were key leaders who remained deeply involved in so many social justice, membership, social governance, and community activities here. Don was deeply respected and much beloved. So as we grieve with his family, we also grieve for ourselves, for the loss of one who brought such love and commitment to all he did. When someone we love dies, especially after a long and fulfilling life, family and friends gather with sorrow and gratitude in their hearts. We come in sorrow, confronting the fact that life ends. This is the condition of our birth, that at the end of the road, near or far, stands always our death. All the generations have had to bear this heavy truth. But all our knowing doesn't make it any easier. The final farewells always come as a loss for which we somehow feel ourselves unprepared. When sorrow comes, wrote Unitarian minister A. Powell Davies, let us accept it simply as part of life. Let the heart be open to pain. Let it be stretched by it. All the evidence says that this is a better way. An open heart never grows bitter. Or if it does, it cannot remain so. In this desolate hour, there is an outcry, a clenching of hands upon emptiness, a burning pain of bereavement, a weary ache of loss. But anguish, like ecstasy, is not forever. There comes a gentleness, a returning quietness, a restoring stillness. This too is a door to life. Here also is a deepening of meaning, and it can lead to dedication, a going forward to the triumph of the soul, the conquering of the wilderness. In the process will come a deepening inward knowledge that in the final reckoning, all is well. So we gather in mourning, and we gather with gratitude. Gratitude for having known Don, for being touched by his love, his friendship, his sharp intellect and wit, his deep commitment to justice, and for the privilege of having been on life's journey with him. And we gather with love, life's greatest expression, which survives even death. It is our love that compels us to fashion a service of celebration, because we are glad that Don lived and that his life touched and transformed our lives. We can never hope to speak to all aspects and achievements of Don's life this afternoon, but what we share today will enrich our understanding of him as a person. So our best gift to one another today, and our best tribute to Don both now and in the future, is to hold him in our hearts and our memories as completely as possible, and through our memories, our stories, and our love, to give him back to one another again and again. So today, we honor our grief, and we also hold up for each other our gratitude and our love. In this spirit, we gather. In this spirit, we begin. We open this sacred time with the lighting of the chalice. The flame we light is an ancient symbol of transformation, and the chalice that holds it is a symbol of the spirit of life and love that Don embodied. As Kai Reed Cleary and Anisha Joy Cleary kindle the chalice in memory of their grandfather, I invite us to rise in body and or in spirit to speak the chalice lighting words in your order of service in unison. We light this chalice in loving memory of our beloved friend and spiritual companion, Don Cleary, and in tribute to the love a single life can inspire. May the chalice remind us of the extravagant gift of life. May it signify the community we create in our being together and our sharing together. Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you. Worth. It is not what the world gives me in honor, praise, or gold. It is what I do give the world so others may unfold. If by word throughout life I can another soul unfold, then I have done what cannot be made good by praise or gold. One tiny thought in tiny word may give a great one birth, and if by that thought was caused by me, I've lived a life of worth.
Please rise in body or in spirit to sing hymn number 159, This is Our Song.
This is my song, oh
Donald Peter Don Cleary was born on October 26, 1939, to Rena and Irving Cleary in Haverhill, Massachusetts. He was the eldest of 3 children. His sister Gail was 2 years younger, and his brother David was 4 years younger to him. Don had a difficult early family life and learned to be independent and responsible for his younger siblings. Don, Gail, and David developed a close relationship that lasted throughout their lives. Growing up, Don spent a few years at his grandfather's farm in New Hampshire and enjoyed roaming the woods with his dog, Pal. The Clearys were a large extended family who took good care of each other, and Don and his siblings received good support from their grandparents, their uncles, and aunts. According to Don, he was a reasonably good, though not outstanding student who loved reading. He was a voracious reader and memorized the World Book Encyclopedia in 6th grade. I don't know how you can call that to something as being a reasonably good student, but that's Don. Don attended high school in Haverhill, where he took college prep courses and also enjoyed going on hiking and mountain climbing with friends, which became a lifelong hobby and passion. He was also a youth leader in the Baptist church and was offered a scholarship to study for the Baptist ministry. Instead, Don chose to attend University of Massachusetts in Amherst and financed his own way through college. He majored in economics and also history and was on the gymnastics team. Don then attended the University of Florida in Gainesville and graduated with a master's in economics, and then later did some doctoral work at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Don also had a 6-month stint in the Army Reserves with the DC National Guard. In 1964, Don started working as an industry economist at the Bureau of Commercial Fisheries, later National Marine Fisheries Service. And during much of this time, Don was involved in bioeconomic modeling to support the development of fishery management schemes and in engineering economic analysis of seafood harvesting and processing technologies. Don and Betty May met during his first year in Washington, D.C., thanks to the efforts of their respective secretaries. I didn't know that was part of their job description, but good for them. They were married on August 28, 1965, in Seaford, Delaware. Their daughter Beth was born in 1968, and son Reed in 1971. After leaving the National Marine Fisheries Service, Don joined the regulatory staff at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where he led the Regional Impact Analysis section. Don was awarded the Meritorious Service Award for Engineering Excellence in 1997. After retiring in 2000, Don worked for a few years as an environmental safety consultant. Don and Betty May joined Cedar Lane in 1972 with their friends George and Elsie Derland and became integral and involved members here. They wanted to be a part of a religious community that was in alignment with their religious views and values. Don taught senior high religious education, served on many committees and groups, including membership, finance, adult programs, Kiplinger Lecture, which he was a founding member, and the Social Justice Council for many years. Don and Betty May cherished their deep friendships with many Cedar Lane members in dinner discussion groups, the Gourmet Club, classes, and traveling together. Don also volunteered with the Children's International Summer Villages, a peace-building program, and served as the summer camp director for 11-year-olds from 12 countries. He also served on the Friends of Chernobyl board, having written about the psychological effects of nuclear disasters. Don loved reading, cooking, genealogy, camping, hiking in the mountains, skiing, traveling around the country and to Europe, and spending time with his family and his many friends. Don and Betty May moved to Asbury Methodist Village in 2018. Don died on October 10, 2022, after a brief illness. Don was preceded in death by his parents, Irving and Rena, his sister Gail, and his beloved daughter Beth. He is survived by his beloved wife of 57 years, Betty May, his son Reed, daughter-in-law, Dr. Kima Joy Taylor, grandchildren Kai and Anisha, his brother David, his brother-in-law Reed, many nieces and nephews, and his many friends, his family of friends here at Cedar Lane. We miss Don.
Hello. Unfortunately, due to an emergency, Aunt Chris and Cousin Lisa weren't able to come, but Chris was gracious enough to send forward some kind words, which I'm honored to read. Dear Betty May, family and friends, I met Donald Peter Cleary 58 years ago as his sister-in-law when I married his brother David. Thank you. We all grew up in Haverhill, Massachusetts, a town settled in 1640 on the banks of the tidal Merrimack River in northeastern Massachusetts. Although Don left Haverhill to continue his education in Amherst, Massachusetts, and Gainesville, Florida, before he settled in Virginia and then Maryland, Don always reached out to David and me, and we visited each other as often as possible, especially in those early years. As the oldest of the three Cleary children, Don became the patriarch of the family after his father Irving passed in 1979. As the years and decades passed, we developed a strong bond, appreciation, and joy in our relationship. Don was a steady soul, kind and thoughtful and very family-oriented. I could always depend on him to greet me with a warm welcome and enthusiasm to share in my endeavors and accomplishments. In other words, he became a wonderful friend who I cherished. Don loved his family and his life in the D.C. area, yet he was very fond of his New England roots and especially of our hometown of Haverhill. Don had fond memories in his youth when he attended the one-room schoolhouse in the historic Rocks Village in the eastern end of Haverhill. With more free time when he retired, Don became involved in the Historic Haverhill Foundation and made numerous research trips to locate and validate historic resources. He became quite the expert on the history of our hometown. With his cousin Francis, they organized the Cleary family reunions to consolidate and enjoy those connections within the family that can drift apart over the years amid the many miles that separated us. Over those many decades, Don was a loving, generous, and consistent brother and friend to me and uncle to my children. In my mind, I know he has passed on, yet he lives on in my heart, and I will enjoy replaying all the adventures and occasions we shared with him, Betty May and his family. Those memories are my solace. With love to you, Don, Christina.
So Don's wife, Betty May, and my mom were best friends since 8th grade. Of course, members of Cedar Lane and the Gourmet Group, of which all the members, at least the parent, or the adult members, are my aunts and uncles. Hence, Uncle Don was always in my life and very special to me. Now, some of you may know that Don, as was mentioned, he was a New England mountaineer at heart. So after I hiked the Appalachian Trail back in 1995, Don was very excited to talk about his beloved White Mountains of New Hampshire. We discussed the huts, the trails, which of the 40 mountains over 4,000 feet we had climbed. While I can claim 13, Don summited all 40. The piece of quartz I placed was collected by my wife and sons back in 2015 from Mount Washington, the highest peak in New England, and the heart and soul of the White Mountains. When I told Betty May that I was going to speak about Don and hiking, and I mentioned that I had a quote in mind from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig, Betty May immediately pulled a copy of the book from nearby and asked, "What page?" Then she proceeded to tell me that Beth had forced, I believe was the word you used, forced both her and Don to read that book, and Reed also confirmed that it was one of Don's favorites. So here's the quote: "Mountains should be climbed with as little effort as possible and without desire. The reality of our own nature should determine the speed. If you become restless, speed up. If you become winded, slow down. You climb the mountain in an equilibrium between restlessness and exhaustion. Then, when you're no longer thinking ahead, each footstep isn't just a means to an end, but a unique event in itself. This leaf has jagged edges. This rock looks loose. To live only for some future goal is shallow. It's the sides of the mountain which sustain life, not the top. Here's where things grow. But, of course, without the top, you can't have any sides. It's the top that defines the sides." When I was maybe 7 years old, the Derlins and the Clearys went camping somewhere up in the mountains. I think it might have been West Virginia. And Don, being the experienced New England hiker, led a small group on a long hike. Reed and I were not old enough to go, but Beth and Karen were. How jealous I was. This was supposed to be a 3-mile hike, arriving back at our campsite around 1 p.m. I remember waiting at the trailhead for them to return, and waiting, and waiting. Finally, probably around 6 p.m., Don's, what I'll now call expedition, comes out of the woods from a very unexpected direction. I remember everybody joking about Don getting lost. When I recently asked my sister, Karen, about her recollection of this expedition, she said, and I quote, "I wasn't worried. I remember seeing Don's face, smiling and not worried. Don said, 'We'll get there when we'll get there.' keep the sun over your left shoulder. We are going in the right direction. Maybe Don really was lost. But I choose to believe that Don's way of getting lost is a good way to live life. Always calm, always unflappable, always steady, always caring, always loving. For Don, every footstep was a unique step in the moment. Thank you.
Hello. I'm not on the schedule, so let me take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Susan Petring Rupp. I'm the eldest daughter of Gail Patricia Cleary Petring, Dawn's sister. I'm here with my brother John today. My youngest sister Karen could not make the trip, and neither could my father. I was asked to provide a few words, which is, I'm hoping I can get through this. To provide a few memories of growing up with my Uncle Don. Memories, of course, fade through the years, but I was fortunate enough to have my paternal grandmother live in the Arlington, Virginia area, so we made numerous trips out to the DC area as we were growing up, probably every 3 or 4 years. So my Uncle Don and my Betty May and my cousin Reed and my cousin Beth were definitely in our lives growing up. I grew up in the 1980s, and this, of course, is the time before cell phones. It was a time when siblings competed for time on the cell phones, and children would roll their eyes when their parents spent hours and hours on the phone talking to their siblings. Much like my mom and my Uncle Don did. They would spend hours on the phone laughing and reminiscing and talking a lot about us children growing up. My Uncle Don was always curious about what was going on in the lives of his nieces and nephews. My brother, my sister, and I loved coming back here to Kensington and staying in that old house with the creaky floors. I will never forget that. You know, it was something very comforting about that house. And we just, I don't know if I can speak for my brother and sister, but I always felt very secure in that house and very loved. My Uncle Don had an interest in my career probably before I even knew what a career was. I grew up loving animals, and I know that when I was very young, fairly young, probably in my teens, he arranged a trip to the National Zoo for me to meet with some of the research staff. You know, through both my master's and my PhD research, he was always constantly asking me very, very detailed questions. I don't know how that man's mind worked, but he would ask me really detailed questions, which I actually found to be a really good practice before my doctoral defense. He attended an awards ceremony for me back in 2002, and I was so honored to have them be a part of my life on that day. It was a big day of my life. He and Betty May provided a place for my brother John to live for what I think was supposed to be a couple of months and turned into something like a year, something like that, as he was making a transition in his career. But I know my brother wanted me to say how much he very much appreciated that from you guys. As I got older and I started entering my own career as a wildlife biologist and a natural resource scientist, I began to speak to my Uncle Don more on a professional colleague level and began to even understand some of the work that he had done through his career. Of course, as an avid reader, he had saved lots and lots of books through the years, and he was happy to pass a lot of those on to me, including those on structured decision making. it was nice to have those conversations with him, with his fisheries marine experience and my wildlife experience. Over the last decade or so, my career has brought me back to Washington, D.C. numerous times, and one of my last visits with Uncle Don I will never, ever forget. I spent several days with Don and Betty May. I was fortunate enough to actually come and stay with them. We took a trip to the CNO Lock and Dam site, where I think there was actually a picture on the slideshow of us there that day. My Uncle Don explained how the systems worked, bringing those barges up and down the rivers. It was really interesting. We talked extensively about family history. My Uncle Don had really gotten into family genealogy at this point, and I think we are all so fortunate that he wrote a lot of that information down. It's information I actually hope to incorporate now that my dad, who's the last remaining of his generation on my dad's side, is working on the family genealogy. I want to bring all that information together from both my mom and dad's side and pass it on to my brother and sister and their children. And I'm so grateful that we had my Uncle Don's perspective on that. The last day I was here, this is going to be hard. The last day I was here, my Uncle Don and Aunt Betty May brought me to the airport. And I want to talk about this story. It's a difficult story, but it's one that I think shows the character of my Uncle Don. Several years earlier, my ex-husband had gotten into some very serious legal trouble. And it was so bad that we lost friends, we lost family, we lost colleagues. Many of them turned their back on my husband and by extension, me, because I chose to stay with him. But at that airport that day, as I was getting ready to say goodbye at the terminal, my Uncle Don turned to me and he said, "I want you to know we are always here for you. You are always welcome at our house, and so is your husband." He reached out to me when it was not a very popular thing to do, and I think that really summarizes the man that my Uncle Don was. I ran into his arms at that point, which was not, both he and I are scientists, we're not the emotional, huggy, lovey types a lot of the times, but I ran into his arms and I could hear him choking back tears. And that moment freed me up to start healing from the trauma that had happened to me, instead of having more trauma imposed on me. So I want to come back full circle and say, yes, memories fade, but a connection was made that day that transcends memory. It connects with the soul. It's a human connection that can't be broken. It's a love. So in a lot of ways, these tears aren't from sadness. They're tears of happiness, because I know one thing for sure. I know that my Uncle Don loved me.
This is a poem that Don particularly liked, because the poet, John Greenleaf Whittier, born 1807, died 1892, was from Haverhill, Massachusetts. The poem is entitled Canosa Lake. As Adam did in paradise, today the primal right we claim, fairer mirror of the woods and skies, we give to thee a name. Lake of the pickerel, let no more the echoes answer back great pond, but sweet Canosa from thy shore and watching hills beyond. Let Indian ghosts, if such there be, who ply unseen their shadowy lines, call back the ancient name to thee as with the voice of pines. The shores we trod as barefoot boys, the nutted woods we wandered through, to friendship, love, and social joys we consecrate anew. Here shall the tender song be sung, and memory's dirges soft and low, and wit shall sparkle on the tongue, and mirth shall overflow. Harmless as summer lightning plays from a low hidden cloud by night, a light to set the hills ablaze, but not a bolt to smite. In sunny south and prairied west, our exiled hearts remembering still, as bees their hive, as birds their nest, the homes of Haverhill. They join us in our rites today, and listening we may hear ere long, from inland lake and ocean bay, the echoes of our song. Canosa, o'er no sweeter lake, shall morning break or noon cloud sail. No fairer face than thine shall take the sunset's golden veil. Long be it ere the tide of trade shall break with harsh resounding din, the quiet of thy banks of shade and hills that fold thee in. Still let thy woodlands hide the hare, the shy loon sound his trumpet note, wing weary from his fields of air, the wild goose on thee float. Thy peace rebuke our fevers stir, thy beauty our deforming strife, thy woods and waters minister the healing of their life. And sinless mirth from care released, behold unawed the mirrored sky, smiling as smiled on Cana's feast, the Master's loving eye. And when the summer day grows dim and light mists walk thy mimic sea, revive in us the thought of him who walked on Galilee.
I'm Bud Ronceville, one of the members of what you may have heard is called the Gourmet Club. So they asked me to speak about what is the Gourmet Club and why is it an important aspect in Don's memory. So 4 young women came into Washington in the 60s, 3 from Delaware and 1 from Michigan. And they either lived together, studied together, worked together, but they did everything together. They finally got married, and they had families, and they traveled, and they all eventually, in the mid-70s, returned to the DC area and have pretty much been here ever since. So we said, how can we keep going? What can we do to make sure this relationship continues? We all like to eat, seemed to be the main factor in what we decided to do, which was share each other's house once a month or every other month, as often as we could, and we'd have a meal. So in the mid-70s, like 73, 74, I think we kind of started this group, and we always would get together, the 4 couples would get together without children at that time, and have a meal. Don looked at this relationship and said, how come only the women are working here? Because the guys would always be somewhere together talking and drinking somewhere else in the house. So he said, this is not a good relationship to continue. How can we change it? I give Don the credit for analyzing the male-female disparity between the work ethics in this group. And we said, Don said, why don't we get the guys involved more? How do you do that is the question. We came up with 2 very interesting initiatives that I think everybody should take advantage of. One was get the guys involved in the kitchen. Okay, give them a task to do. And how do you do that without destroying the meal that you're trying to prepare? So we eventually started with a scheme which says, let everybody be given some things to bring to the event. Don't pre-cook things and bring them ready to serve, like a meal, a dessert, a salad, a side dish. That's going to be prepared at the gathering, not ahead of time. So we did that. We made a list of all the items you'd need for the entire meal and associate those lists with one of the 4 families. Go out and find the things you need. Some of them are interesting because I had been to Vietnam and I said, where are you to find good Nook Mom in this country? You know, it's not something you can find in any grocery store. So some of the issues were hard to find. So, but that was part of the preparatory effort. So you go and you bring a grocery cart full of items to the house. Then when you got there, you were assigned a task, and you had to work with somebody else, not your spouse, to perform that task. So this got a little bit more interesting when you eventually figure out that you were the least experienced person involved in the process. And so always you'd hopefully get assigned a task with some lovely young woman that knew what in the world she was doing. So I think that the 2 considerations that Don brought to this conversation were preparatorial efforts and final preparation in a shared environment. And everybody had to eat what you finally came up with, which was really something you look forward to after a while. And we did this for almost 40-some years, sharing this relationship among these 4 couples. So I give Don so much credit for keeping us together for that long a period of time with this one event, which was a very positive relationship for all of us to have. Thank you, Don.
Maya Angelou, I learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Don always made me feel very special with a smile. I'm Kathy Napper, and I've been a longtime member of Cedar Lane and a friend of Don and Betty Mae Cleary's for around 50 years, and have continued our friendship over these years with both of them. Cedar Lane played a central role in Don's life. I recall being asked several times by Don if I would join the Board of Trustees, and of course, he did convince me to do just that. How could anyone say no to Don? He was persistent, persuasive, and had that smile. He served on many committees and teams at Cedar Lane, and as Abhi said, was very committed to his social justice work. He chaired the committee for many years. He organized a group of volunteers, including John and me, to prepare meals once a month for a Bethesda men's shelter. It was one of the most organized groups we served on. He was very methodical with charts and lists of substitutes when we couldn't serve to keep us on track. His social justice work also extended beyond Cedar Lane. As Abhi said, one important group he served on was the National Board of Friends of Chernobyl Centers. The group supported Ukraine after the 1986 nuclear power plant accident. My husband and I were part of a Cedar Lane group of friends, including Don and Betty Mae, that met every month to have dinner and great discussions. Don was a passionate cook, as you might have gathered, who loved to prepare food, and he loved using many herbs in his dishes. He knew how to bring out the nuances in each herb and spice. Lucky Betty May to have such a husband to cook for her. Don prepared a delicious dinner for us this past September when we were all together at the beach. One day he spent most of the afternoon preparing a black bean and corn entree. Fresh corn from the market, of course, freshly shucked butter beans, and all the makings for a memorable feast. He was a food connoisseur who knew where to find the best ingredients and the best restaurants. We always let Don know we always knew that if we let Don research restaurants in the area we were in, which he loved to do, he could spend hours doing it, we would have a fine dining experience. Don loved to read, and he was always ready to have a long discussion after finishing a book or an article that had interested him. His knowledge was broad and ever increasing. Over the years, our dinner group spent many weekends at the beach with the Clearys. Don was always ready to take anything on before his mobility difficulty slowed him down. But he never lost his mental acuity. Trivial Pursuit, Quiddler, cards, games. He enjoyed being with people and sharing time together. When remembering Don and our long family friendship, I remember a happy man who was always up for anything. For instance, for his 50th birthday party, he dressed like a little boy in his shorts, t-shirt, and beanie hat with a spinner on the top. Still, quite a memory still in my mind. Don knew how to enjoy life to its fullest at work or play. It was a life well lived is an example of gratitude, service, and kindness to all who get to share it. What a privilege it was to have Don as a friend and a part of our lives for so many years. I will miss him.
I think all of you know my sister passed away 30 years ago, just after college, unexpectedly. And at the time, it was inconceivable to imagine what my parents were going through. And for years afterwards, I worried that that was something that a parent couldn't come back from. And I remember my dad, who, as you've heard, has always been incredibly active and committed to the community, to the causes that he works with, to his job, had thrown himself back into many activities. But about 5 years after my sister passed away, he was working with Children's International Summer Villages, and he had been on the finance committee and the recruiting committee, and he'd been the executive director at some point. And they needed someone to direct a village, which involved having 40 11-year-olds from around the world come and make macaroni art and play soccer games and stay up late for a month. And I was shocked when my dad told me that he would be doing that. And I remember thinking that he was back and trying new things and reaching out for new challenges. And he had a wonderful time. I think you saw a picture in the slideshow of him dancing with some of the kids and doing some of the activities. And we actually went to the open day there. There's a day for families from the DC chapter to come and see the kids and the show they put on. And I ended up sitting next to someone I had known when I was a kid, who is now my wife. And it was really only because my dad had put himself out there, and that we were there to support him in his day, and it turned out he was really there to support me. And so, you know, in thinking of all the things, and I think you heard some of the stories today, all the ways that my dad reached out to support his family and his friends and the community. Some of it was incredibly intentional and very methodical. And a lot of it was, you know, happy coincidence and circumstance, and just really the gifts that he gave continue to go on now. And looking at my kids, I know that, you know, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my dad, but oddly enough, they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him as well. And when I was thinking recently about my sister, who's been gone longer than she was here, I realized that, you know, she's still in my heart, and I think of her every day, and I think of all of the gifts that she gave me as an older sibling, and all of the inspiration and goals and the hope to be the person that she would have been. And I realized that, you know, my dad is gone, but all the people he touched are still here, and he's in our hearts. And I'm just incredibly grateful to have known him and been one of the people who received the gifts and the love that he had to offer. So thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Reed. And thank you all for sharing these wonderful memories and stories about Don. I invite us now to rise in body or in spirit to sing hymn number 121, We'll Build a Land, in honor of Don's deep commitment to justice and peace.
And I realize some of us may know this and some of us may not, so I'm going to sing through verse 1 first so you can hear what it sounds like, and then I'll come back to the beginning and invite you to sing verse 1 with me. We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that we come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them garments instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll be a land building up ancient cities, raising up devastations from old, restoring ruins from generations. Oh, we'll build a land of people so bold. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come build a land where mantles of praises resound from spirits once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness stand her people. Oh, come build the land, my people we seek. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
As I was listening to all the memories and reflections of Don, a quote attributed to William Henry Channing, who was the nephew of the Unitarian divine William Ellery Channing, that captures how Don lived his life, came to mind. So I pulled it up. It goes, "To laugh often and love much, to win and hold the respect of intelligent persons and the affections of little children, to earn the approval of honest critics, and to endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty always, whether in earth's creations or human handiwork, to have sought for and found the best in others, and to have given it oneself, to leave the world better than one found it, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, a cheery letter, or a redeemed social condition, to have played with enthusiasm, laughed with exuberance, and sung with exultation, to go down to dust and dreams, knowing that the world is a wee bit better, and that even a single life breathes easier because we have lived well. This is to have succeeded." I don't think I need to do an exegesis of this to give you why I feel this in many ways captures the way Don Cleary lived and loved in his life. He was one of those people who succeeded in making the world more than a wee bit better in so many ways. There is the truth of family, the deep and abiding love between Don and Betty May, and of his children, his grandchildren, his siblings, his nieces and nephews, testifies to this truth better than any word can say. He was a loving husband, father, grandfather, elder brother, uncle, and son. And his obvious pride and quiet love for his family ran deep, reflected in his presence, his constant presence in their lives, and his encouragement and support and cheerleading. Don and Betty May were together for more than 57 years. Don loved Betty May, and she loved him back deeply and completely. And there's the truth of his long and distinguished government service. His contributions to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's oversight process cannot be overstated. He played a leading role in the development and application of methodologies to assess environmental impacts of the construction and operation of nuclear power plants, including generating electricity, alternative energy sources, and regional socio-economic impacts. And some of his work included working on the 3 Mile Island Special Inquiry Group and the decisions surrounding the Yucca Flats disposal of nuclear waste issues. He was also a mentor, a role model, and a friend to all of the staff. And there's the truth of his deep and enduring commitment to justice and equity, peace, and the environment. And there is the truth of his deep love for his spiritual community, Cedar Lane. He cared deeply about Cedar Lane and supported it generously with his time, his talent, and his treasure for many years. And then there are other truths as well. He was conscientious, hardworking, self-reliant, and collaborative, pragmatic and visionary. He was an independent and critical thinker who was deeply spiritually grounded and in touch with his religious values and his moral convictions. He had an abiding sense of what is right and what is just. And he had a wonderful sense of humor, a self-deprecating sense of humor that chose to take himself lightly. In his final years, I remember Don for continuing to engage life with zest and character, while also struggling with the natural process of aging and health issues. Now, these are some of the truths about Don that are eternal, but they don't express the real truth of the person, the spirit, his zest for life, that will be so sorely missed, but that continues to live and shine brightly in our memories of him. Though we shall miss his many gifts and many truths, his holy curiosity and wonder about the mysteries of existence, his generosity, his compassion, his sense of humor, his commitment, his deep sense of justice, the savor he brought, and the spice he brought that he loved using in his cooking will always stay with us. And we are glad and grateful that he lived and was the person he was. Like many of you, I mourn his death, but I also find comfort in knowing that he leaves all of us a life-giving legacy of love and service. So in gratitude, we celebrate our memories of Don, memories of a life well lived. May these, our memories, ease the pain of loss and bring us joy, peace, and assurance that death reminds us of the goodness of life and the sweetness of our love for each other. May the fire of his memory bring to us not only an awareness of the nobility of his life, but renew in us our own commitments, strengthen us in our faith so that we might do the work we have been given to do and be the people we are called to be, so that our deeds are the answers to our prayers. And so, friends, I leave you with this benediction a farewell from Don's favorite poet, Greenleaf Whittier. What shall I say, dear friends, to whom I owe the choicest blessings, dropping from the hands of trustful love and friendship as you go forth on your journey to those older lands, by saint and sage and bard and hero trod. Scarcely the simple farewell of the friends sufficeth. After you, my full heart sends such benediction as the pilgrim hears, where the Greek faith its golden dome uprears, from Crimea's roses to Archangel snows, the fittest prayer of parting, go with God. Don may say, go with peace, go in peace, go in love, living gently, loving mightily, and bow to the mystery. May it be so. We invite you to remain seated for the postlude, and following the postlude, we will join the family in the lounge for a memorial reception where we continue to share our memories and stories of our beloved friend, Don Cleary. Thank you all for being here.